On the 7th of July, 2006, on a sunny morning when the air in Blue Valley was already filled with summer heat, four friends gathered in the backyard of a modest two-story house on Oak Street. 5 years later, their names would be spoken in whispers across Arizona, and in 2011, the nation's largest television stations would air footage of the cave so horrifying that some viewers would write complaints to the Federal Communications Commission. Daniel Hawk, a 27-year-old history teacher at the local high school, with alert gray eyes and a habit of constantly adjusting his thin, metal-rimmed glasses, was finishing stowing camping gear in the trunk of a 98-year-old blue Ford Explorer. Next to him, Rachel Baker, a 25-year-old anthropology student at the University of Arizona, was methodically reviewing her list of necessities with a pencil between her lips. Her curly brown hair was gathered into a sloppy ponytail, and her simple plaid shirt, khaki shorts, and sturdy Timberland hiking boots made her look like a seasoned traveler. Michael Clark, a 26-year-old photographer with a dreamy look and always disheveled blonde hair, carefully stowed his Canon photo equipment in special waterproof cases. These cameras and lenses worth more than $5,000 were his main professional tools. Jason White, the youngest of the group, a 24-year-old ethnography graduate student with a neat beard and a perpetual smile on his face, was checking navigation aids and laying out route maps. A week before departure, the friends noticed a strange change in Daniel. Always outgoing and joking, he became unusually silent and aloof. Rachel caught him one evening in the university library. He was sitting surrounded by ancient maps and rare manuscripts about the ancient peoples of the American Southwest. "Is something wrong, Dan?" she asked, placing a hand on his shoulder. He raised his eyes, and Rachel was struck by their feverish gleam. "I found something, Rach. Something no one's ever written about before." He shifted to a whisper. "There are petroglyphs in the canyon that are not mentioned in any scientific work. Not a single one." "How is that possible?" That same evening, Daniel's mother, Eleanor, called Rachel. "He's been kind of strange the last few days." The older woman's voice shook with concern. "Yesterday he said this creepy thing to me. Some places want to be found, and some places want to be disappeared into." "What do you think he meant by that?" Rachel reassured Mrs. Hawk, but was left with a heavy foreboding herself. Perhaps that was why, as she packed her first aid kit, she triple-checked her stock of Evian water and Campbell's canned food, as if her intuition told her that the standard supply might not be enough for the unexpected. The goal of their 2-week expedition was ambitious: to document and catalog little-known ancient petroglyphs in remote canyons on the Arizona-New Mexico border. Many of these drawings, up to 3,000 years old, had never been properly studied by the academic community. Daniel, who had received a small grant from the Blue Valley Historical Society, planned to use the collected materials for his upcoming book on the lost cultures of the Southwest. On the last evening before leaving, the friends gathered in the backyard of Michael's house. A warm twilight was descending on the town as they grilled steaks, laughed, and discussed the details of their upcoming itinerary. The neighbor's dog watched them lazily from under a hibiscus bush, occasionally flinching and whining quietly for no apparent reason. "We'll stop at Painted Desert first, then move toward Mesa Verde," Daniel was saying, running his finger over the tattered Rand McNally atlas. "And right here," he pointed to a faintly visible dot in the corner of the map, "is Shadow Canyon. There's almost nothing about it in the guidebooks, but the locals say there are petroglyphs there that are at least 2,500 years old." "Why is there so little information about it?" Jason asked, leaning closer to the map. Daniel shrugged, but his eyes had regained that strange glint that Rachel had noticed earlier. The locals don't like to talk about it. They think it's an unkind place. Michael's mother, Martha Clark, an older woman with kind eyes and graying hair, came out onto the veranda with a tray of cold lemonade. As she said goodbye, she hugged each of the young men tightly for some reason, holding the hug longer than usual, and said quietly, "Be in touch every day, please. Every day." The morning of departure was cloudless and promised a hot day. At 6:15, Daniel started the engine of the Ford Explorer, which responded with a steady hum. The four friends, excited about the adventure ahead, laughed and joked as they took their seats. Michael took one last picture, 4 smiling faces against the rising sun. This photo would later appear on the front pages of the newspapers under headlines about the mysterious disappearance. "Got everything?" Daniel asked, looking around at his comrades. "Adventures in mysterious petroglyphs. I can't wait!" exclaimed Jason, buckling his seatbelt. Rachel cast one last glance at the peaceful Blue Valley street. Something made her pull out her phone and take a short video. The morning city, the neighbors' houses, the mailbox with the number 38. It was as if she wanted to memorize these mundane details before a long absence. "Let's go," Daniel commanded, and the Ford Explorer nodded over the potholes of the driveway and left the sleeping city. The four friends, talking animatedly about the route and occasionally checking the tattered atlas, drove off on their adventure, unaware that they would never return to Blue Valley alive again. No one knew then that those 4 smiling faces would become part of one of the most mysterious and gruesome criminal cases in state history, and that Jeremiah Coltrane's name would be spoken in whispers like the name of a demon from ancient legends. On July 12, 2006, at 17 hours and 23 minutes, security cameras at the Rusty's Gas and Diner gas station in the town of Blue Mass captured the last known footage of Daniel Hawk, Rachel Baker, Michael Clark, and Jason White. The blurry black and white footage shows the 4 young men smiling and chatting animatedly as they enter the gas station convenience store. The temperature that day reached 38 degrees Celsius, the usual weather for a July afternoon in the desert regions of Arizona. Laura Page, a gas station cashier, in her statement later given to detectives, described the encounter with the travelers in detail. "They looked normal, nothing strange that I noticed. Maybe a little tired from the heat, but definitely in good spirits. They paid for a full tank and took 4 bottles of Coca-Cola, a couple packs of chips and chocolate bars. I remembered them well because the guy with the glasses, the older one, spent a long time asking me about Shadow Canyon." A receipt later discovered in the glove compartment of their car confirms the purchase. 4 bottles of Coca-Cola, 2 bags of Lay's chips, and 3 Snickers candy bars. Mundane details that became the last tangible evidence of the 4 friends' lives. This guy, Daniel, was asking about the shortest route to the rock formations of Shadow Canyon, Laura Page continued in an interview she gave a year after the disappearance for a Discovery Channel documentary. "I warned him that the place wasn't good. We have a lot of people here in Blue Mass who don't like to talk about him. The old-timers think the canyon is haunted by something unclean." He just smiled and said, "That's what makes the place interesting to explore." Surveillance footage shows a blue Ford Explorer leaving the gas station at 17 hours and 35 minutes, heading southeast on Federal Highway 64. That's the last time anyone saw the 4 friends alive. The alarm was not raised until July 15th, when Daniel's parents, having not received a promised call from their son for 3 days, contacted the Blue Valley Police. Given the age of the missing men and the fact that they had traveled to remote areas to explore, the police initially showed little concern. However, on July 16th, at 8 hours and 45 minutes in the morning, the situation changed dramatically. National Park Ranger Thomas Redfield, making a standard detour through the area, found a blue Ford Explorer with Arizona license plates AZ247JHT, abandoned on a narrow forest road 30 miles southwest of the main Mesa Verde campground. The car was in perfect condition, keys in the ignition, a full tank of gas, all personal belongings in their proper places. In the trunk were 4 North Face backpacks. In the cabin, Canon camera equipment worth more than $5,000, wallets with money and documents, untouched supplies of food and water. When I saw the car, my first thought was, the engine had stalled and they went looking for help, Ranger Redfield recalled. But the key was in the ignition, the tank was full. Open the hood, everything was fine. No sign of mechanical failure. It looked like they just pulled over, got out of the car, and vanished. San Juan County Sheriff James McKenzie, who arrived on the scene at 10 hours and 15 minutes that afternoon, was the first to notice a strange detail. A blue Levi's denim jacket, later identified as belonging to Jason White, was hanging from a fir branch nearly 4 feet high. In 20 years of practice, I've never seen anything like this, the sheriff said at a press conference a week later. Forensics couldn't explain how the jacket could have gotten there. That would have required a ladder or other such device, which was not nearby. If someone threw it there, why? And with what force would it have had to be thrown to get it hooked just so? By noon on July 16th, a search and rescue team was formed. Sheriff's Department K-9 unit specialists with 3 trained German Shepherd dogs surveyed the area around the car. The dogs confidently picked up the trail and led the team on a barely visible trail deep into the woods. The dogs walked confidently, which meant the trail was strong and clear, explained dog handler Eric Summers in an interview with a local TV station 2 months later. It indicated that all 4 had passed through here relatively recently. We followed the dogs for about 2 miles on a rocky trail until we reached an unusual rock formation. This formation turned out to be a huge basalt boulder, towering about 8 meters above the surrounding landscape. Locals called it the Spirit Stone, a name that would later gain grim notoriety in the context of the disappearance. What happened at the boulder, I can't explain to this day, Summers admitted, nervously stroking his graying beard. All 3 dogs stopped at the foot of the rock at the same time, made a circle, and just refused to go any further. They turned around, whimpered, and lay down on the ground. In my 15 years of practice, I had never seen anything like that. This was not the behavior of dogs that had lost the trail. It was something else. After the search dogs failed, Sheriff McKenzie requested additional help. For the next 7 days, more than 200 volunteers, 3 helicopters with thermal imaging cameras, and a special team of FBI agents combed the area within a 10-mile radius of where the car had been found. Every crevice, every cave, every ravine was explored repeatedly. The result remained the same: 0. On July 23rd, after 7 days of continuous search and with no results, the official authorities put forward the theory of a possible accident. According to Sheriff's Office spokesman Alan Prescott, the most likely scenario is that all 4 fell into one of the canyon's many deep crevices, which are difficult to access due to the terrain. Parents and loved ones of the missing have strongly rejected that theory. "My son is an experienced hiker," Robert Hawk, Daniel's father, said at an impromptu press conference outside the search headquarters. He would never lead his friends into a dangerous place without proper preparation. And how do you explain the lack of bodies? How to explain the jacket in the tree? How to explain the behavior of the dogs? Something else happened here, and I won't rest until I know the truth. Rachel's mother, Sarah Baker, in an interview with the Arizona Republic, voiced a version that seemed fantastic at the time, but would take on an ominous meaning 5 years later. I believe someone took our children, someone who knows these places like the back of his hand, who could appear and disappear without leaving a trace. On July 27th, the official search was suspended. The last search helicopter flew over Spirit Stone that day, and at the foot of the boulder, James Mackenzie left a note in a sealed container. "We'll be back. We'll find you." The sheriff didn't know how prophetic those words would prove to be, or what horror would be revealed to them 5 long years later. On March the 17th, 2011, on a cold morning with low, rain-swollen clouds, geologist Marcus Freeman was finishing his 6-month expedition to map little-known cave systems in the Shadow Canyon area. The day promised to be the last in a weeks-long endeavor. Freeman was already packing up his equipment when he noticed an unusual geologic anomaly on the eastern slope of the canyon. Something didn't add up in the natural rock structure, the 42-year-old scientist later recounted in an exclusive interview with the Arizona Tribune. "My attention was drawn to a small group of rocks that looked deliberately arranged. It doesn't happen that way in nature." Intrigued, Freeman set aside the gathering and headed toward the strange formation. After clearing away the sediment and pushing aside several large rocks, he discovered a narrow passage leading deep into the rock. Following standard survey protocol, the geologist recorded the coordinates of the entrance with a Garmin GPS receiver, took a series of photographs, and only then ventured inside. When I pointed a flashlight beam into the darkness and pushed back the rocks blocking the entrance, I was seized by an incomprehensible terror, Freeman recalled, visibly pale even months after that day. There were some strange metal objects on the floor that looked like chains, and the walls were covered with symbols, unlike anything I had seen before. I've spent over 15 years of my life in caves, but I've never seen anything like this. Freeman did not move deeper into the cave. Something, professional intuition or ordinary human fear, stopped him. Once outside, he immediately contacted the San Juan County Sheriff's Office by satellite phone. The signal was weak, and the conversation was interrupted, but one word, body, was enough to set the entire law enforcement mechanism of the region in motion. An FBI task force led by Agent David Morrison was dispatched to the scene of the discovery. They arrived on the scene at 14 hours and 20 minutes. The forensic team, dressed in white protective coveralls, methodically photographed and documented every inch of the cave, moving deeper and deeper down the narrow corridor, which after 30 meters widened into a spacious underground chamber. What they discovered inside would later cause even seasoned FBI agents to seek psychological help. The underground chamber, about 6 by 8 meters in size, with a ceiling about 3 meters high, was illuminated by a faint natural light coming through a narrow crack in the top of the vault. In the center was a small underground spring, forming a shallow lake about 1 meter in diameter. And around the perimeter of this chamber, chained to the walls with makeshift chains, were 4 bodies. The scene looked like straight out of some medieval nightmare, recalled one of the forensic experts, who wished to remain anonymous. The bodies were in a state of natural mummification, preserved by the dry desert air of the cave. Their arrangement looked ritualistic, According to the report of medical examiner Dr. Samantha Woods, document number FB 2011-0317-SR4, all 4 victims have been identified as young men who went missing 5 years ago: Daniel Hawk, Rachel Baker, Michael Clark, and Jason White. The deaths were due to dehydration, but at different times, believed to be between 3 and 8 weeks after the estimated date of disappearance. Particularly disturbing was the fact that the nature of the shackling allowed the victims to move within a radius of about 3 meters of the fixation point, with access to a small underground water source. This indicated the perpetrator's intention to prolong their life in confinement. Someone wanted them to suffer for a long time, Dr. Woods concluded in her report, which would later become key evidence at the trial. The chains were made from modified car parts, presumably the same make as the missing Ford Explorer. The work required metalworking skills and technical savvy. The walls of the cave presented a separate subject of investigation. They were covered with hundreds of strange symbols painted in red ochre and charcoal. Dr. Robert Knotson, an anthropologist at the University of Arizona, invited by the FBI to analyze the drawings, spent nearly 72 hours in the cave, carefully documenting each symbol. This represents a distorted mixture of ancient symbols from various cultures: Anasazi, Hopi, Navajo, intertwined with elements characteristic of occult practices of European origin, Knotson said at a closed briefing for investigators. Whoever created this gruesome gallery had a deep, albeit distorted, knowledge of anthropology and ancient beliefs. Particularly disturbing is the recurring motif of transformation through suffering, a concept perversely borrowed from the initiation rituals of various cultures. Among the finds discovered in the cave, a sealed plastic Tupperware-branded container hidden in a small alcove drew the investigators' particular attention. Inside was a Sony SD card, protected from moisture by silica gel packets. The contents of the memory card shocked even seasoned FBI agents. It contained recordings of the captives' last days of life, video diaries they had kept on a Canon camera, apparently left to them by their captor, along with spare batteries. Obviously, recording video diaries was part of the perpetrator's twisted ritual, explained FBI psychologist Dr. Alan Shepard in his analysis report. He wanted not just the physical suffering of the victims, but the documentation of their psychological state, their gradual fading away. This points to a special type of serial killer, one who derives satisfaction from prolonged control over the dying process. On one of the recordings, dated presumably the 3rd week of confinement, Daniel Hawk, addressing the camera with a gaunt face and sunken eyes, utters a phrase that would later be key to unlocking the killer's identity. "Now I understand what he meant by keys to the portals of rebirth. He thinks he's freeing us. Jeremy, if you're watching this, you're not a liberator, you're a monster." Towards the end of the day of March 17th, 2011, another alarming discovery was made. In a corner of the cave, among a pile of rocks, Agent Morrison noticed a handmade wooden box. Inside were the victim's personal items: Daniel's driver's license, Rachel's silver bracelet, Michael's eyeglasses, and Jason's penknife, the sort of trophies the killer had kept. "It's a collection of mementos," Shepard explained, "a classic sign of a serial killer. But there's another aspect. He put them together as an offering, as sacrificial gifts. That points to a religious and mystical aspect to his motivation." By nightfall, the area around the cave had been cordoned off for 2 miles, floodlights set up, and a mobile investigation headquarters deployed. Inside the cave, the painstaking work of forensic scientists continued. Outside, yellow ribbons of police fencing fluttered in the gusty wind, and clouds were gathering over the valley of Shadow Canyon, portending a storm. Agent Morrison, standing at the entrance to the cave and looking up at the night sky, uttered words that many news outlets would later quote, "5 years they've been waiting for us to find them. Now it's our turn to find the man who did this, and I swear we will find him." The initial euphoria of finding the missing was replaced by a hard realization of the magnitude of the work that awaited the investigation team. For 2 weeks after the cave was found, FBI agents, forensic scientists, and medical examiners worked almost around the clock, analyzing every detail of the crime scene. Photos of mysterious symbols from the cave walls were sent to experts across the country, and a summary of the investigation appeared in the April issue of National Geographic magazine. It was this publication, with blurred images of some of the symbols, that led to an unexpected breakthrough. On April 2, 2011, at 14 hours and 7 minutes past 14, the FBI hotline received a call from a woman who identified herself as Emily Grant, a former employee of the Mesa Verde Wildlife Refuge. Her voice sounded worried but confident, Agent David Morrison, who led the investigation, later recalled. She said she recognized the symbols published in the magazine and that she could name the person who drew them. 3 hours later, 47-year-old Emily Grant was already sitting across from Morrison in the FBI's mobile headquarters, unfolding a tattered folder of documents in front of him. "I saved this when he was fired," she explained, pulling out several work logs with pages yellowed by time. "Always felt like there was something wrong with him, and then he just disappeared, and everyone forgot." In the margins of the official reports on trail conditions and park attendance, dozens of symbols, exact replicas of those that covered the cave walls, were scrawled in small but confident handwriting. "I recognized those signs right away," Grant testified, pointing to the intricate geometric shapes. Jeremiah Coltrane, the former caretaker, used to draw them in the margins of his work journals all the time, called them keys to the portals of rebirth. We all thought it was a harmless fad. Over the next 48 hours, the FBI's analysis division assembled an exhaustive dossier on Jeremiah Coltrane, and the picture that emerged sent chills down the spine of even seasoned agents. The 54-year-old former ranger, who had earned an anthropology degree from Berkeley in 1984, had been fired from the National Park Service in 2003 after a series of conflicts with co-workers. According to personnel files, his dismissal was preceded by complaints of bizarre behavior that included unauthorized nighttime explorations of historic sites and archaeological sites. He became obsessed with ancient cultures, especially their ritual practices, said former Ranger Chief Richard Dawson. "I once caught him in an enclosed cave with petroglyphs. He was sitting in front of the rock paintings, swaying and muttering some phrases in an incomprehensible language." After the dismissal, Coltrane's trail was cut short. According to official records, he was reported missing in 2007 after failing to show up for a scheduled appointment with a psychiatrist, ordered by a court as part of proceedings about his inappropriate behavior in public places. "We thought he may have committed suicide," the local sheriff explained when FBI agents brought up the old case. His car was found at the edge of the canyon, his belongings lying untouched. A classic case. Using Coltrane's recent movements and testimony from local residents, FBI agents quickly established a possible location for the suspect, an isolated cabin located 15 miles north of Chain Cave, as the site of the bodies was now called. The cabin, accessible only by a narrow mountain trail, was not marked on any official map. "He picked the perfect place for a hermit life," Agent Morrison commented, surveying the area through binoculars from a nearby ridge. Natural shelter, its own water source, complete isolation, and yet strategically placed to allow observation of trails leading to popular hiking destinations. The capture team was formed of 12 agents specializing in remote area operations. At 5 o'clock in the morning on April 5th, they surrounded the cabin, waiting for the suspect to return from a night outing. Coltrane was not there, but what the agents discovered inside his dwelling caused one of the 20-year FBI veterans to step outside to take a deep breath. The cabin was a veritable archive of horror. The walls were completely covered with detailed maps of the region, with power points marked with red crosses. Hundreds of hidden camera photos of park visitors were neatly organized into folders, with notes on race, estimated age, and energy potential. In the corner of the room stood a simple wooden cabinet with 47 compartments, each holding an item belonging to the disappeared people: watches, glasses, jewelry, notebooks. 4 compartments held items belonging to Daniel and his friends: Rachel's silver chain, Jason's penknife, Michael's pocket compass, and Daniel's student ID card. "He collected them like hunting trophies," concluded FBI psychologist Dr. Alan Shepard. "Each item was carefully packaged, signed, and dated. It's not just a collection, it's a museum of sorts, a monument to his crimes." The most shocking find, however, was a detailed diary in 12 volumes, neatly arranged on a makeshift shelving unit. Each volume was numbered and dated, beginning with the year 2003. The date of Coltrane's dismissal from the Park Service. Records were kept daily, in small, neat handwriting, with photos, newspaper clippings, and drawings pasted in. "This is the most detailed account of the formation of a serial killer I've ever seen," Dr. Shepard admitted as he flipped through the pages. "Here is documented the complete transformation of the personality, its disintegration and reconstruction around a distorted idea. The entries for the 9th through 13th of July in the year 2006, the days directly related to the disappearance of the 4 friends, took up 11 pages. Researchers found detailed descriptions of the tracking, kidnapping, and subsequent imprisonment of the victims. I release the chosen ones from the material world through the gate of purification, returning their energies to the true masters of these lands," Coltrane wrote in an entry dated July 13th, 2006 year, the day after the abduction of the 4 friends. "The new foursome is ideal for the ritual: teacher, mind; photographer, sight; ethnographer, memory; and female anthropologist, intuition. All 4 elements of consciousness together will open the way to the ancients." What followed were detailed notes on the victim's condition, reactions, and progress of transformation made after regular visits to the cave. Coltrane documented the gradual physical and mental fading of the 4 friends with the methodicality of a scientist observing an experiment. As the agents reviewed the last volumes of the diary, their attention was drawn to entries dated March 2011, just 2 weeks before the cave was discovered. They contained detailed plans for new abductions, with victims already selected and locations marked for their transformation. "We realized we were dealing with an active serial killer preparing for new crimes," Agent Morrison explained. "This completely changed the nature of the operation. We went from investigating to preventing more victims. By noon on April 5th, an extraction team was formed. Camouflaged cameras and motion sensors were set up around the perimeter of the cabin. All that was left to do was wait for the owner to return. In his command center, looking through the pages of Coltrane's diary, Agent Morrison couldn't help but think about how thin the line was that separated human infatuation from obsession and obsession from monstrous insanity. Perhaps in another life he could have been a distinguished anthropologist, Morrison reflected. Instead, he turned into a monster who sincerely believed he was freeing souls through agonizing death. Dusk was thickening over Shadow Canyon. The echoes traveling between the rock walls were like the whispers of the long dead. It was night when Jeremiah Coltrane usually went out hunting. The morning of April 5th, 2011, was unusually quiet. Even the birds were silent in the canyons of Shadow Canyon, as if anticipating the end of years of drama. At 9:15, the FBI agents huddled among the rocks and bushes around the cabin noticed movement on the trail. Jeremiah Coltrane was returning from a night outing, carrying a canvas bag and a long hunting knife. He was moving strangely, slow and methodical, like a man performing a ritual, recalled Agent Eric Simmons, who was involved in the operation. When we surrounded him, he didn't even try to run or resist. He just knelt down, put the bag next to him, and raised his hands. The only phrase he uttered upon arrest caused the agents to interject, "You're too late. The portal is already open." The sack revealed recently stripped tree bark with freshly painted ochre symbols, exact replicas of those that covered the walls of the Cave of Chains. The detainee remained silent during transportation to the Albuquerque Detention Center, only occasionally humming a quiet tune without words. The initial psychiatric evaluation took 8 hours. Dr. Elizabeth Hope, a leading forensic psychiatrist with 20 years of experience, would later write in her report, "The suspect exhibits classic signs of paranoid schizophrenia with distinct elements of messianic delusions. It is noteworthy that the disease developed against a background of deep immersion in a distorted interpretation of ancient beliefs and occult practices, which gave the delusional constructs an internal logic and structure." While Coltrane was in custody, teams of investigators methodically surveyed other locations marked on his maps. Within 3 weeks, 3 more caves were discovered with similar ritual elements, symbols on the walls, makeshift chains, and evidence of long-term human occupancy. Each cave was like a new chapter of a nightmare, Agent Morrison recounted in an interview for a documentary released a year after the arrest. In 2 of them, we found the remains of 7 other people reported missing from the years 2004 through 2009. Among the victims were 2 tourists from Germany and 5 Americans from different states. Analysis of Coltrane's diaries revealed a consistent pattern in his choice of victims. He specifically sought out groups of people interested in ancient cultures or archaeological sites. Groups of 3 or 4 people, which included members of certain professions or hobbies, were particularly favored. He created his own twisted mythology, Dr. Hope explained. In his mind, each group of victims represented a particular quartet of forces who, through suffering, were to open the mystical gates of rebirth. The investigation revealed that Coltrane committed his first murders as early as 2004, shortly after he was fired from the National Park Service. With each new crime, the ritual became more elaborate and elaborate, culminating in the case of the 4 Blue Valley Friends. The trial began on September 15, 2012, and lasted 32 days. Despite defense claims that the defendant was insane, the jury on October 17th unanimously found Jeremiah Coltrane guilty of kidnapping and murdering 11 people. Judge Michael Reardon sentenced him to life in prison without parole. Throughout the trial, Coltrane remained eerily calm. When the judge asked if he wished to make a final statement, he uttered a phrase that made a heavy silence hang in the courtroom. "They didn't die. They have been transformed. And one day you will all see that I spoke the truth." That evening, relatives of all 11 victims gathered on the courthouse steps. Sarah Baker, Rachel's mother, a thin woman with prematurely graying hair, made a brief statement to the press. "The justice system will not bring our children back to us, but at least now we know the truth and can begin the healing process. May their memory live on in our hearts, not as victims of madness, but as bright, talented young people who loved life and pursued knowledge." In the spring of 2013, the National Park Administration erected a plaque on a lookout near Shadow Canyon. The granite slab is engraved with the names of all 11 victims and a simple inscription: "Seekers of knowledge, stopped in their tracks, but not forgotten." In June of that year, the parents of the 4 Blue Valley Friends established an educational foundation in their name that now funds research projects in archaeology and anthropology, with a special emphasis on expedition safety and psychological preparation of the participants. "We want young people to keep exploring and discovering, but to do it safely," explained Robert Hawke, Daniel's father, at the foundation's opening ceremony. "Our children have lost their lives in the pursuit of knowledge. May others achieve what they could not." In a unanimous decision by the victims' families and National Park management, the entrance to Chain Cave, as the site of the tragedy is now officially called, was permanently sealed with a concrete slab and boulders. The coordinates of the cave were removed from all official maps and geologic reports. However, the memory of the tragedy continues to live on in unofficial rituals. Local rangers report that every year on July 12th, the day of the disappearance, dozens of people, tourists, journalists, anthropology students, come to the Spirit Stone, near which the search dogs once lost track. They leave 4 bottles of Coca-Cola at the foot of the boulder, the last thing the friends bought before they disappeared. "It's a strange combination of mourning and remembrance," reflects Ranger Alex Foster, who has worked in the area since 2015. Soda bottles, such a commonplace item, have become a symbol of lives cut short. Perhaps it's that very ordinariness that makes the tragedy all the more palpable. Jeremiah Coltrane is serving a life sentence in the psychiatric ward of a maximum security federal prison in Colorado. According to wardens, he has little interaction with other inmates and staff, spending his days drawing the same symbols on sheets of paper, which he then methodically folds into complex geometric shapes. Thus ended the story of 4 young Americans who set out to explore ancient mysteries, but became part of a dark legend. Their tragedy reminds us that sometimes the most terrible danger comes not from wild animals or natural elements, but from the distorted consciousness of those who are obsessed with the search for forbidden knowledge, who see in the suffering of others the way to mystical enlightenment. And every time dusk falls over the canyon of shadows, the rustling of the wind between the rocks can be heard as a whisper, either a warning or a reminder that not all secrets are worth revealing.